As I navigate the halls of this predominantly white charter school, I can't help but notice how the student body and staff mirror one another in their racial, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. This sameness shapes not just the educational experiences, but the very air we breathe in this space. While this school may toot a diversity of curriculums, it often reflects the cultural values and norms of its majority, casting a long shadow over those students who come from different backgrounds. For students like Muslims, Blacks, Hispanics, or from any other minority group, the nuances of their identities can sometimes get lost in translation, giving rise to misunderstandings and the weight of stereotypes. Every day is a delicate balance where I see my students and their peers dancing between dual identities. They are trying to fit the mold set by our school while desperately clinging to their roots. I notice some of them engaging in code switching, deftly shifting their language or behavior depending on who's watching, carefully dodging any spotlight that might expose their cultural differences. It's an instinctive performance, one that begs the question, is it embraced, overlooked, or merely tolerated by their peers, teachers, and administrators? In doing so, I often wonder how these shifts impact their sense of self and authenticity. Language, the lifeblood of communication, becomes both a barrier and a bridge here. For students who are still honing their English skills or who speak with thick regional accents, the gaps in understanding can prompt what feels like impatience or even ridicule. I've seen that linguistic diversity, while enriching, can lead to sharp misconceptions. The unfounded stereotypes surrounding accents and dialects, that they somehow correlate to intelligence or behavior, are a harsh reality for many. Then there's the heavy cloak of cultural stereotyping that hangs over them, offering little warmth and much discomfort. Muslim students have faced the prying eyes of curiosity when they wear a hijab or talk about their dietary practices. Those intrusive questions can sting, leaving them feeling like an outsider in a space that's supposed to be welcoming. For Black students, the burden is no lighter. They're often caught in the web of assumptions tied to their behavior and academic capabilities, facing biased treatments that shapes their school experiences. Finally, the Hispanic students grapple with similar challenges, as the assumptions about their language proficiency and economic status hover over them like a shadow, often missing the truth of their individuality. Inside this environment, the pressure to assimilate looms large, pulling them in directions that starkly contrast with their cultural expressions. It's a constant struggle to find that equilibrium between embracing who they are and fitting neatly into the majority culture's mode. Are their rich heritages being celebrated or unwittingly muted? I can sense the uneasiness when their cultural contributions aren't acknowledged, when the school doesn't hold events that illuminate their diverse backgrounds. It feels like their stories are deemed secondary. They need representation, multicultural narratives woven through our curriculum, perspectives that illuminate their shared histories. Without diverse viewpoints in our materials, they risk becoming invisible, their cultures not valued. I can't help but question whether the school is actively fostering an inclusive environment or quietly overlooking their collective cultural concerns. It's a journey, one where the voices of the marginalized deserved not to just be present, but celebrated in this institution that houses all of us. Here are some examples of the language challenges I encountered in my predominantly white charter school environment. These scenarios vividly illustrate how language barriers, ranging from dialect differences to unique cultural expressions, can spark misunderstandings, judgments, and even overt discriminatory treatment. Misunderstanding due to dialect or accent. I remember a time when I saw students with distinct accents. African American vernacular English, or influenced by Spanish, was repeatedly asked to clarify their words. Despite articulating as clearly as possible, the administrator and their peers struggled to comprehend them, their confusion stemming from unfamiliarity with their accent or dialect. The impact was profound. I felt their wave of self-consciousness wash over them, like their way of speaking wasn't right. Each instance chipped away at their confidence, nudging them to alter their speech, reshaping it into something that felt less authentic just to earn respect or credibility that they craved from those around them. Code switching as a survival strategy. In our diverse school, many students from bilingual homes, like those with Spanish or Arabic backgrounds, naturally blended their languages or shifted to a more formal version of English while at school. I often found them code switching, morphing their language, accent, or expressions depending on the crowd they were with. Yet, in a predominantly white environment, their code switching was sometimes unjustly perceived as broken English, a mere sign of poor language skills. I can recall seeing them offended by the comments such as, "You don't have to use big words here," or "Your English is just fine. You don't need to try so hard." Unaware that for them, it was a skillful navigation through the rich tapestry of their bilingual heritage. Stereotyping based on speech patterns. As a Black student using African American vernacular English, I couldn't help but notice their speech was often dismissed as informal or unintelligent, despite its linguistic richness and validity. I found that teachers or peers responded more favorably to those who spoke in a standard American English form, a tone unconsciously linked to professionalism and perceived intelligence. This reality was frustrating and isolating for them, applying an unfair pressure to mold their natural way of speaking into something more palatable. Eventually, this pressure limited their participation in class discussions. They hesitated, fearing judgment or stereotypes based solely on their language. Cultural expressions and misinterpretation. Certain phrases or idioms from my students' Hispanic heritage, for example, "lo que será, será," which means whatever will be, often blended with blank stares or dismissive remarks. These cultural expressions, along with gestures or preferred communication styles, like the Muslim students who refrained from their physical greetings, were frequently misinterpreted as signs of disinterest. Over time, these misunderstandings led to a perception that they were different or difficult. They felt a growing pressure to suppress their cultural expressions, fostering an increasingly deep sense of invisibility and disconnection from their own language. Accent discrimination and judgments on intelligence. I witnessed microaggressions directed at students due to their foreign accents or strong regional twangs. Imagine another teacher presuming that they needed extra help simply because their accent didn't conform to their expectations, or when their pronunciation was corrected in ways that felt more like unwarranted scrutiny than constructive feedback. These experiences etched feelings of inadequacy into their psyche, often dissuading them from speaking up in class. When corrections hinged solely on their accent, they reinforced the notion that only certain speech patterns were acceptable, pushing those of them who spoke differently further into the margins. Stereotyping in a multicultural educational environment is a complex issue that impacts students' well-being, academic performance, and sense of belonging. In schools where students come from diverse cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic backgrounds, stereotypes can emerge when individuals make assumptions about others based on appearance, accents, cultural expressions, or backgrounds. Here's a closer look at the nature and impact of stereotyping in multicultural educational settings. Students of different races and ethnicities might face assumptions about their abilities, behaviors, or socioeconomic status. For example, Black and Hispanic students may be stereotyped as less academically capable, while Asian students or white students might be assumed to excel in science and math. These stereotypes often ignore the individuality of each student and can lead to biased treatment. Language also plays a significant role in stereotyping. Students who speak in different dialects or with accents, or those who are bilingual, may be perceived as less fluent or unintelligent, even though they possess unique linguistic styles and skills. Such biases can lead to dismissive attitudes towards students' contributions in class discussions. Students from different religious or cultural backgrounds also may face stereotypes based on their traditions, attire, or practices. For instance, Muslim students who wear hijabs or other religious symbols might be seen as conservative or different, leading to exclusion or misunderstanding. Students from lower income backgrounds might be stereotyped as less motivated or likely to face academic struggles, whereas students from higher income backgrounds might be assumed to have greater academic support and resources. The impact of stereotyping on students. When students are stereotyped, it may affect how teachers and peers perceive their abilities, sometimes resulting in lower expectations or biased treatment. For instance, a teacher might unconsciously give less challenging work to a student based on assumptions about their background. Stereotyping also often leads to social isolation, as students may feel misunderstood or alienated. Students might avoid using their native language or sharing aspects of their culture for fear of judgment. Over time, this can lead to internal conflicts as students grapple with the pressure to fit in at the cost of their cultural identity. Steps I took to address language problems and stereotypes. One of the first steps I took was to initiate open discussions on the topic of language diversity. I would encourage my peers to explore how language intertwines with identity and how dialect, accent, and cultural expression adds vibrant layers to our communication tapestry. Through these conversations, I aimed to easily understand linguistic differences and foster awareness of the kaleidoscope of valid expressions that exist among us. Another important approach was to normalize the practice of code switching and the embrace of multiple dialects within our school environment. I made it a point to integrate this subject into classroom activities, demonstrating how naturally we adapt our language according to different contexts and audiences. By sharing their own experiences and my own experiences of switching languages or dialects, I hope to shift perceptions and help my peers see code switching not as a flaw, but as a valued skill. This intentional focus cultivated a culture of safety where students felt free to express their authentic selves without the shadow of judgment looming over them. Educating others. I recognize the importance of advocating for inclusivity practices to enrich our understanding of each other. I encouraged staff to incorporate more culturally responsive training and to host platforms where students could proudly share their heritage, dialects, and cultural narratives. Collaborating with teachers and administrators, we worked towards weaving cultural sensitivity into the very fabric of our school's atmosphere. I actively engaged in organizing and participating in events like diversity days and cultural presentations. These gatherings served as precious opportunities for our community to learn the vast array of traditions, languages, and practices that surround us. I took to heart the chance to emphasize how our language diversity elevates our school experience and to educate my peers about the damaging effects of stereotypes. Through these initiatives, I strive to create a more inclusive atmosphere that celebrated the unique tapestries of all backgrounds. Lastly, I also pushed for policies that honor multilingualism, advocating for things like bilingual signage throughout the school or enhanced support for students who thrive in multiple languages. These measures not only reinforce the idea that linguistic diversity is a treasure, not a stigma, but also contributed to a welcoming environment where every student could flourish. I also knew that I needed to make some personal adjustments. To bridge cultural gaps and minimize misunderstandings, I found myself adjusting my communication style to make others feel more comfortable or to align with the expected norms of the environment. This sometimes involved consciously adopting a more standardized dialect or simplifying certain cultural phrases. While these adjustments assisted in daily interactions, they underscored the importance of creating a space where authenticity could not only exist but be celebrated. I learned to provide context for expressions or gestures that might have seemed foreign to others. If I used idioms unique to my culture, I would be sure to follow up with clarifications, preventing confusion. These thoughtful adjustments allowed me to maintain my self-expression while nurturing understanding among peers, teachers, staff, and administrators that assist in subtly dismantling stereotypes along the way. Lastly, I found strength in forming alliances with others who faced similar challenges. By creating a supportive network within our school, I connected with other teachers and students who shared experiences of stereotyping or language obstacles. Together, we built a mutual support system where we exchanged stories, discussed strategies to confront biases, and organized initiatives that highlighted the significance of inclusivity and cross-cultural understanding. In the end, I believe that embracing linguistic and cultural diversity transcends mere tolerance. It invites us to truly appreciate the vibrant tapestry each individual weaves into our shared community. I envision schools as sanctuaries where every student feels seen, respected, and empowered to reveal their authentic selves. By acknowledging and confronting our own biases, I recognize that we can cultivate more inclusive and compassionate environments. I encourage myself and others to reflect on the stereotypes we may hold unconsciously, taking meaningful steps to ensure that every voice is not only heard, but celebrated. Together, we can forge spaces where diversity is not just accepted, it's cherished and revered.